we're going to get started. Thanks for coming. It's a great turnout. And how many people have been here for some of the other presentations here at the library? I think probably most of you, right? And how many have been here for a couple of mine?
Yep.
So there will be a couple of references to the last talk that I did here when I did the then and now talk, when I referenced us purchasing a large collection of glass plate negatives. So there's already been some great surprises in the negatives. I'll have one of those in here that was one of my favorites actually, and so definitely get ready for some cool photos. Okay, so Reeves Park. You know, the title for it being a Victorian gem, of course, is a very typical Victorian park of the time period. It was common in that time frame, like right after the Civil War, the 1870s, to form community parks, usually owned by the township or the borough, and they would develop these parks, and it would be a place to put Civil War monuments. That kind of surged that interest to put town Civil War monuments. Of course, they're all over the country, everywhere. You see town monuments, and a lot of them were in small little parks like this. What's interesting is that the Civil War, or Phoenixville Civil War monument, was already constructed before the park was even a thing. So it already stood in Mars Cemetery in the 1860s. So it was a very early Civil War monument, and Phoenixville is kind of like ahead of the game on that, because I'm sure there probably would have been, some sort of interest in putting it in Reeves Park if it was built later on. But anyway, so this is just a real classic postcard front. There's some of you probably have seen this one. They're out there. It's a mass-produced postcard from 1905. Of the main entrance to the park, which kind of looks similar. Of course, that arch is there, but it was changed quite a bit. I have some other photos that are a little bit lighter that you'll be able to see, but that arch lost some of its Victorian fanciness throughout the years. And so Reeves Park had come about in the early 1870s, the idea of developing this park. The borough had to actually purchase a piece of property and for this to even exist. And there was a lot of push from people in the community, different community organizations, nothing unsimilar to nowadays. And they wanted to develop a community park. And one of the steering points of building this park was to build a park so they can put a monument of Mr. Reeves there. So David Reeves, of course, was the president of the Phoenix Iron Company and had passed away in the early 1870s. And there was a big push to build this monument. They had the funds very quickly. David Reeves was a very well-liked person in the community. He was, of course, he was their boss, but he also was a huge philanthropist in Phoenixville till the day he died. So he was very wealthy. Of course, you know where the Reeves mansions are on Star Street. So on the corner of Star and Bridge, there was the first Reeves mansion, which sat in the back, kind of behind Holy Ghost Church. That was torn down, and they lived in that house, during this time frame, like before the time frame. And then in 1860, he had built the mansion that's still standing, the one that borders on the Star Street, and that's where he lived until he died. And when he built that giant property, that property went all the way back. And if you ever walk back there, it goes back pretty decent. And back in that area was actually the first community park in Phoenixville, and it was known as Phoenix Park. And so you'll see a lot of early references to that. Anything pre-Reeves Park, you will see references to Phoenix Park. It was a very popular park for what was developing in America at the time, but especially in Phoenixville, were baseball teams. And Phoenixville had a very early baseball team, as far as I have found it back as far back as 1865, that they had an established league. They had multiple teams, you know, churches, the Phoenix Iron Company, some of the cotton mills, so this is when baseball was really becoming popular, and they played baseball back there. That was one of the common things back there. But they also had tons of picnics, and a lot of the Phoenix Iron Company and the Phoenix Bridge Company picnics were back there. And we have a lot of photos at the Historical Society of some of those picnics. And they would have, like, you know, the Phoenix Iron Company engineers picnic and the bridge builders picnic, so they all were back there on his property. He let them all mingle around on their property, and one of the reasons why he was so well liked was during the Civil War. You know, of course, the Iron Company now was producing the Phoenix Column, which was patented in 1862, and at the exact same time, they were now mass producing the 3-inch ordnance rifle, or the Griffin gun. So the company was absolutely booming, and the Civil War breaks out and is in full swing in 1862, 63, and he had made a declaration to his workers that said if anybody wants to join the Union Army, and in fact he was encouraging them to join up, that he would hold their jobs for them. He wouldn't charge their family housing, because the Iron Company built almost all the housing up until that point, most of it. He wouldn't charge the family housing. He would give the families food out of his own pocket, and then eventually he would use his own money to send women out on the trains out to some of the battlefields down to Virginia, but especially out to Gettysburg. There's a famous incident with him literally just giving them money and said, "Here you go out to Gettysburg," and they were recovering the bodies to bring them back to Phoenixville, which there's several that were brought back to Phoenixville that were killed at Gettysburg that were brought here and reburied. A lot of them are in St. Mary's Cemetery. So he was a very well-liked person, and so after his death, the iron workers, the everyday iron worker, had contributed 5 cents, you know, to building a monument to him, and they wanted to put it in a special place, and that kind of sparked that interest, and that sparked the drive to acquire the property and build Reeves Park, obviously named after him. So this is an awesome early map in the 1870s, somewhere, I think it's about 1874 map, and you can see this is Reeves Park right here. Okay, so there's nothing there except for the monument. So when they first purchased the property, one of the problems that they had was, believe it or not, at the time, the back half of the property was actually owned by Schuylkill Township. So they were like, "Oh yeah, we're going to buy this land," and then they were like, "Oh, we can't just take this from them," and they kind of went back and forth, and eventually it eventually became part of the borough property as the borough extended out farther. And so, but as you can see why it would have been Schuylkill Township, because you can see here's the park, and here's Star Street here, and there is nothing there. You know, you got First and Second Avenue. A lot of those houses were built later on, even into the early 1900s, the majority of them. But there were some. There were about 6 houses approximately that were there, and you could see them popped in here a little bit. And those were the houses that would have been surrounding the park at the time. But at the time, the park was very rural, and you can see how out here there was just nothing. You have a couple other cool things on here. So you can see, right, the Reading Railroad Station. There's Columbia Station. There's Reeves Mansion, they built in 1860. There's the old one that was still standing. And that mansion, of course, this house here, it's hard to see this house that's over here, was originally built by James Starr in about 1750. That's the one, if you remember, that was still standing there for a long time. It faced Bridge Street, and it was torn down maybe about 20 years ago, I'd say. So lots of great stuff in this map, and you can, talk about it all night. But it's a great early map, and it kind of shows you now what the park is kind of becoming. So, what they had to do when they bought the property was they had to level the ground out because it was not ready for a park. And they started leveling the ground in the summer of 1871. So this is literally right after Reeves. And they had a lot of initial plans for the park. Some of them happened and some of them did not happen. If you go into, this is some of the pre-stuff. This is the stuff that even before the borough of Phoenixville actually got the official deed to the property, they were already starting to do stuff, which is kind of interesting. But they initially planned to build a fence. The fence was planned around the entire property, a wrought iron fence. There was a fundraiser that was held in 1871 at the Masonic Hall, and they raised $100, which, at the time that was a lot. The David Reeves statue was finally installed on January 13th, 1872. That is 6 years before the park officially opened. The fence was completed in March 2nd, 1872. So there was a fence that went all the way around the original Reeves Park property. Now, we'll talk about, you'll see a little bit this, but here's the park here, right? This is not the park. So that's the original plot of the park before. This is where the baseball field is and everything and all this stuff back here. So this was the original plot for Reeves Park. The first tree was planted on April 19th, 1872. And in early 1874, the park was declared to be all in Phoenixville. So that's when they officially were like, okay, this is all going to be within the borough property. And then there was an actual deed that was recorded on April 9th, 1875. So this is all, 3 years or more before the park officially had its grand opening. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from the deed book recorded on April 9th, 1875. The Phoenix Iron Company to the Burgess and Town Council of the Borough of Phoenixville. Like a lot of property in town, the Phoenix Iron Company owned it and would sell it to the borough. The Phoenix Iron Company owned the town, not as much the borough. And the Iron Company sold multiple properties to the borough so they could build their first firehouse. They could build their first marketplace, which is where Root Down is. All those first borough buildings were, most of the land was donated by the Iron Company, which of course, ironically, Reeves technically owned. So the deed portion that read is the Borough of Phoenixville, their successors and assigns forever, upon condition that the said piece parcel, a lot of land hereby granted, shall be maintained and used only as a public square or park to be forever protected from unlawful invasions or trespasses by cattle, or otherwise clear of all buildings of any sort or kind, and properly laid out and kept in repair for the ornamentation of the borough of Phoenixville, and for the recreation and enjoyment of the inhabitants of the said borough and all other citizens of this Commonwealth. So they were very adamant on what they wanted this park to be, and for what it to be in the future. So back to the statue a little bit. Another map. I like maps. There's another shot closer up of the original plot. So here's Main Street. Okay. Here's 3rd Avenue. Here's 2nd Avenue. There's the park. Nothing in it except for the monument. And you can see the trees. That's how many trees were in the park. There's some photos that you can see what the trees actually still there. They literally lined the entire property, 2nd Avenue, 3rd, Main Street, and Star Street, and then lined the entire property, and then went down all the walkways. And so it must have been quite a scene, and must have been really cool at the time. There's Mr. Samuel Reeves. And of course, there's an earlier photograph of the monument, and this is the original fence that was around it, and very Victorian. And you can see little more trees, and especially in the distance there, you can see trees in the back there that are obviously long gone. Yeah, the statue was special because, of course, we said the workers of the Phoenix Iron Company actually raised $5,000 of the $6,000 that was needed to cast the statue because David Reeves had been so loved by all his workers. The fact that they raised $5,000 in the 1870s is crazy, and you're talking about people who did not have money at all. These are, especially in the 1870s, almost the entire population of the Phoenix Iron Company workers were either Irish or German. So, these people did not have money, but he was, they, like I said, they would give 5 cents if they could, but they wound up raising $5,000. The statue was cast in 1871, and we said it was erected in January of '72. It was 6'4" tall, mounted on a 5-foot square American blue marble base. And so they did not go cheap on this monument. So, we'll come back to this one. We're going to see another shot here. So here's the Reeves Monument. This is actually a cool postcard because it actually says the first public school bell that was upside down, used as a planter. That's what that is right there, okay? And the first public school in Phoenixville was on Church Street, where Pax is. And that's where Samuel Pennypacker went to public school there. This is right after the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania officially started the public school system, and Phoenixville was right on it. And we had we had schools before that, but they were not part of the public school system. Of course, the famous one was the octagonal schoolhouse that was built right next to the Phoenix Iron Company office building. That predated the Church Street one decently, and but obviously it was a tiny little school, and even at the time when it was built, the population was decent. So obviously it was not a school for every child in the borough. I don't know how they picked and chose who went there. But it was very small until they did the Church Street one, and then they had the Dayton Street School, of course, on the north side, which was about almost close to the same year as the school on Church Street.
Ryan, that bell disappeared in the '60s. There was a big stink about it.
Yeah.
Any more word?
I have never heard anything of what happened to it. And I mean, I think people maybe think that it was someone stole it for scrap, most likely. Yes.
Isn't that the bell that's sitting out front of the historical society?
No, the bell that we have at the society is from the Gay Street School. So, this is the photo I was telling you about. This is a glass plate negative from about 1905 of the statue in a little area around the park. That light is the light from the gas lamps.
Wow.
So, Kynard was the photographer, who was an amateur photographer, believe it or not, who owned the Kynard sporting goods store that, he sold camera equipment, and he, had that interest, but he was just an amateur photographer who took amazing photos. And he took photos of stuff that views that we have never seen before. And this is one that we just obviously acquired, that is just a cool shot. That is Kynard's bicycle. He was really into bicycles, and this is 1905. This is when they became really popular, and he sold them in his store. But he also was interested in himself. And some of the other negatives that we have, if you come down to the society, we have our new exhibit up on transportation, and it's not just like trains. We actually have motorcycles, bicycles, an awesome license plate collection. Just all kinds of great stuff, and a whole bunch more of those negatives are printed and out on display, especially of the motorcycles and the bicycles. They're killer photos. There's one that is one of my favorites so far, is a photo of Kynard and two of his friends posed on bicycles up on like these little like ledges and cliffs on at Black Rock, like right off of Indian Point. And they're like up on these little like rocks, and they're like kind of tiered down, and it's just an incredible photo. And being that they're glass plates, and he took the photos well, they're as clear as a bell, and they're incredible. If you scan this at a high resolution, you can print one almost the size of his back wall. If you scan it at a 6400 DPI, that's how incredible they are. So this is a great shot. There are some of the original benches Of course, they're around town. We have one sitting outside the Historical Society. You know, and those legs, they made them look like tree branches. If anybody, of course, remembers some of those benches in front of the band shell not that long ago. So, great photo.
Ryan, where was Kiner's store?
Right on Bridge Street. So it was in the Majolica building. So, you know, you look up, it has the date on it. Originally it said Kynard on the front of it as well. We have photos of that he took, obviously, of his own store, and there's some great shots. He had his store later on, and I know some World War II veterans that went in there. One of them is my friend, and he had brought back a whole bunch of German cameras, and he sold them to Kynard. And I always ask him what kind of cameras were. He can't remember. They're probably all Leicas or something crazy. But he knew, Kynard obviously knew what they were and wanted them and bought them from him. So he was really into photography. So here's a really cool shot of them actually lighting one of the gas lamps. It's a really cool shot. So they would literally have to go in there and do that. In June 24th, 1879, after just 2 months of the self-producing gas lamps they were actually deemed worthless. And Borough Council replaced them with gas lines. And by 1880, new gas lamps adorned the entire park, which is pretty cool. They actually put a gas line in there at that time. Another map, 1874. So you can see Reeves Park all the way down here, kind of still looking the same. This is a cool shot, but you can see more of the town here. And of course the iron company just taking over all that property down here and the north side here. And just a great map. But as you can see, it's still the same plot, still the same layout. So, it wasn't until Thursday evening on July 4th, 1878 that they actually had the formal opening of Reeves Park. This is a copy of one of the original invitations that we have at the Historical Society. And the interesting that they had the grand opening at the park at 7 o'clock at night. And so it's kind of interesting. They did a lot of stuff in the evenings. For those that don't know, the Dogwood Festival in 1943, the first Dogwood Festival was actually, and the parade was at night. Pretty interesting. So, committee. These are the committees. This is the committee of the Reeves Park people. Since Borough Council was not acting quickly enough to adorn the park, H.H. Gilkison and Colonel Fred Tenkate took the initiative and organized a committee of 16 gentlemen representing all the interests of the people of Phoenixville. They took it upon themselves to plant more shade trees, furnish seats throughout the grounds, and erect a suitable platform for brass bands to conduct open-air concerts, the band shell. So, the borough owned the property, but people were just taking it upon themselves to just say, you know what, we're going to build this now, and we don't want to wait for you. And they were paying for it, so the borough were probably like, oh, all right, they're paying for it. So, these are some of those names I was talking about. Almost, I think all of them were all Civil War veterans. So 10K definitely was. He was a lieutenant and became a captain in the Pennsylvania Reserves, wounded at Antietam. Gilkison was also a Civil War. He became a colonel. Of course, Gilkison family is, you had Phoebe Gilkison from the newspaper, and then of course you had the famous musician Gilkison. So if you want to,
Terry,
yeah, have come on my cemetery tour in Morris Cemetery. We always stop at his grave. So, pretty neat that they had. I still have a copy of that. This is one of the houses that was there before the park was officially established. There was, like I said, there was only about 6 properties. That's one of them. House is about the house is probably somewhere between 1865-ish, like that style. So, but it was there before the park. So Reeves Park postcards. There's multiples of the Reeves Park postcards. And sometimes you see some that are a little less common views. This one's a little bit of one of the less common ones. You can clearly see all the trees, and this is up a little farther, and it's kind of interesting because you can't really see the monument because there's like this water fountain in here, and then up here you can see the edge of one of the gazebos, the original gazebos, and of course you have one of the cannons, and of course those cannons were placed there when the park opened. Those two cannons are both 3-inch ordnance rifles made by the Phoenix Iron Company, and then, of course, they were there way before the cannon case. Yeah, that wasn't until later on. So those two cannons were, original to the park. And from what I can understand from research is that those cannon barrels were literally just laying down at the Iron Company properties. And of course, the one that winds up in the case was also on the Phoenix Iron Company property. Some people might remember it sitting out front on on his wooden carriage. So there's photos of that. And that wasn't moved until Reeves Park until 1963. So I handed you guys those papers that you have in your hands. Those are the rules and regulations, the park rules, the original park rules from the 1870s. If you read your paper, you can read that they're, kind of, similar to some of the newer ones, but obviously some real crazy old rules that are on here that pertain to the 1870s, like no person shall cut, break, or any way injure or deface trees, shrubs, plants, turf, buildings, seats, fences, lamps, and or sanctuary of the park. Pretty much don't vandalize. But no person shall turn cattle, goats, swine, horses, dogs, or animals loose in the park. Pretty interesting. And they're telling people that you're not allowed to play baseball and cricket, football, soccer at the time, and or any other games with a bat and ball except croquet. It's like so random. Of course, they said baseball was really popular at this time. This is when it was really starting to get popular, and they were not allowed to play at Reeves Park.
What was shinny?
I am actually not sure. I forgot to look it up, and it sounds like some real classic 1800s game that nobody plays anymore. But that's probably something similar to do with some sort of stick and a ball. Yeah, so similar rules, but obviously changed throughout time, and the liquor policies back in the 1800s were a lot looser, and they were allowed to have that in Reeves Park. Obviously, they weren't allowed to, go crazy, but there was a different mindset with that kind of stuff back then. So there's a little bit better photo of that entrance. That's the original entranceway into the park. And as you can see, it's very fancy and very shaded. There's a lot of trees right behind it that you can't even see Reeves' statue back there and the water fountain here. This is the other entrance that's closest to the library that also had one of those cool entryways that's like the one that you see now. And obviously the park is laid out almost like it's like identical. It really has not changed. You can see the little slope up and the little stairs, and you can see the cool entryway that was there. Once again, lots of trees. So the band shell became quite an attraction at the park, and it became one of the most used things at the park. It became, we're going to go to Reeves Park because of the concerts. And this became very popular, like, late 1800s and the early 1900s, especially with a lot of brass bands, patriotic music, and a lot of that kind of stuff. They would have shows there all the time. And the bandshell was also has a very interesting history where it was almost demolished multiple times, and thank God that didn't happen. The bandshell is very unique, and there's not many parks in our area that actually have a 1800s bandshell. or even one that goes into like pre-1920s. Yeah, that kind of concept started going away. They didn't really building them outside, and so the fact that there was one that size built in Little Reeves Park is crazy, and we're lucky that it was saved when it was, and it's kept up. Interesting is, here's your benches. We were talking about the benches, right? Flagpole, same spot. There was a water fountain that was actually between the flagpole and the front of the stage. And it was there for a long time, and then it disappeared. As you can see, some interesting plants that were around the stage. This is probably getting ready for some event that they were going to have. And you can see the setup for an awning, which is really cool. So this is a 1963 photo of the band shell, and as you can see, it was definitely needed some repair. This is around the time that in '63 that they wanted to tear the band shell down. So 1963, the borough they actually had a vote on borough council to tear the band shell down, and they didn't get what they wanted. So another postcard, the bandstand, sometimes referred to, not always a band shell, but you can see all the benches, you can see the fountain back there. And big open areas behind there at the time, not a lot of houses. Here's a cool shot where you can see how they have chairs set up for an orchestra or brass band inside the band shell. This is a little bit later, in 1920s to 30s. Another cool shot that you can see the water fountain again. It's actually practically the same postcard as the other one, but a little bit of a different angle. Dogwood Festival, 1960s. So we're still trying to figure out who this guy is, but there's multiple photos of him, and obviously a country western singer at the time. It's just a great photo, and we have a ton of negatives from the 1950s and 60s of the Dogwood Festival, and just great shots of like this kind of stuff. Here's a little closer up shot of the fountain, and here is an actual photograph of the fountain and not a postcard. So here's a photograph. As you can see, it was a boy up here. Has his hand up. He probably was holding a lantern at one point. This is kind of towards the end of the times of the water fountain, which is sort of to kind of be taken apart randomly and disappears. It looked really cool at one point, and it'd kind of neat if it was still there, but it is not. So this is a pretty rare photo that, this is actually a photo in my personal collection that has never been published. This is a photograph of Battery C, the 107th Field Artillery. Now this is right before, how many people know where Battery C's armory was? On Buchanan Street, right? So, before World War I, before 1917, when they were indoctrinated into federal service, they were still very much of a Pennsylvania National Guard regiment. They had different designations, and they were usually just generally referred to as Battery C. Battery C had started in the late 1870s, and a lot of their officers were Civil War veterans, and it was a home guard. This is the early forms of the Pennsylvania National Guard. They never had intentions to go to war. Obviously that changed, especially in the Mexican border campaign, World War I, and World War II. Those units played significant roles in all three of those. This is a cool photo that was the coming home of Battery C from the border of Mexico. So this is the Mexican border campaign, the campaign to capture and track down Pancho Villa. And a lot of the Phoenixville guys were down there. Not only did you have Battery C, but you also had Company D of the 111th. At the time, it was the 6th Pennsylvania Infantry. Of course, their armory is still standing as well, which is the Civic Center. So this was just a great photograph that I've never seen any other content related to this at Reeves Park. And the kids here, I believe they're from a church. There's no other identification on there, but this guy standing back here could be an old priest. He looks very formal and strict. But you see these kids here, and either if they're not from a church, my other guess is some sort of Boy Scout related thing. And Phoenixville had a Boy Scout troop at the time in the 19-teens. So just a really neat photograph that they were celebrating the homecoming. And of course, a couple years, the next year, they were now sending off Battery C right back, and now they were going to France. And then they didn't come home again, and they had a big homecoming celebration in 1919. And a lot of that stuff occurred at Reeves Park. Does anybody know who one of the most famous musicians is that played at Reeves Park in the band show? Yes, John Philip Sousa. That's pretty epic. So the fact that he actually played there tells you, and this is in his heyday, tells you that Phoenixville was a place to stop. If they were in Philadelphia, they were usually hitting Philly, Phoenixville, and Reading. And so Phoenixville having this awesome band shell was just a great performance place for somebody like that. And obviously when he came here, it was a huge deal. And like everybody from town was there to see one of the most popular musicians of the time frame, of the time period. The original gazebo. So you can see it had like this way fancier, very Victorian, very 1870s, and they had this little side stage, like a reviewing stand on the side here. This is one of the best photos that I've seen of this gazebo. Decked out to the nines with patriotic stuff. What this is, you can see I also have a framed image down here that it's the 50th anniversary of the Phoenixville band, the Phoenix Brass Band. And this was taken in 1897. So that tells you, the Phoenix Brass Band incorporated 1847. Very early brass band in our area. And they wound up staying in the organization into the 1900s. And during the Civil War, they enlisted and they were a brass band in the 2nd Pennsylvania Infantry. And they came back from war for a short stint and came back, and they continued to do they were the band that played every sort of event that you can possibly think of in Phoenixville that had anything going on. It was the Phoenix Brass Band. Anybody that was a musician in Phoenixville that played those types of instruments, you were cool if you were in the Phoenix Brass Band. That's the best way to put it. So it was a thing. Their building is still standing. It's located on the corner of Gay and Morgan. So I'm sorry, not Morgan, Hall Street. So give me a second. Walnut. Gay and Walnut. If you look at the top, it says PBB, Phoenix Brass Band. It's actually in the stone above the thing. You can clearly see it, clear as a bell. That was their meeting. That was their building. That's where they practiced. That's where they had all their meetings. They were like a social club practically as well. Big to do, obviously. So this is their 50th anniversary, and they had all of it at Reeves Park. One of the restored and gazebos. This is there's always been these great efforts throughout the years for restoring things in Reeves Park or adding things into Reeves Park that always have been done a great job of when they added things to Reeves Park, they did it well. And so this was a big project with the, I have a plaque here that you can see, the Sussman Centennial Pavilion. And I'm sure you will recognize almost every name on here, obviously. You got Debbie Mitchell, Barbara Cohen, Dave Fries, Betty Banjak, Dick Kunch, just a lot of Phoenixville people at the time. This was in 1999. And so this was, they redid the pavilion and made it look real nice. So, of course, one of the most significant pieces in Reeves Park that everybody gets attracted to is the cannon case. And the case was built and dedicated in 1963, and it was built to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. And located inside the case is an actual Griffin gun, not a 3-inch ordnance rifle. So those are two different things. So the Griffin gun was the original patent by John Griffin in the 1850s. That is what's in that case. So if you look at that case, you can see that that cannon is different from the ones that are on the pedestals. The one on the pedestal is very streamlined, come out, no welts around. It was much more rifled. This cannon had a big welt in the back, which is kind of like that classic cannon design at the time. But what made that one so special, it was because it was made out of iron. And then Reeves, who bought the patent for the iron company from Griffin, who was turned down multiple times from Safe Harbor Iron Works in Lancaster County, came out here and said, "Hey, you want to buy my patent?" And Reeves was a smart man and bought the patent and hired Griffin as one of the superintendents of the iron company. And the rest is history. They started producing the cannons and made approximately 1,200 cannon barrels from 1861 to 1864. So 45% of the Union artillery at the Battle of Gettysburg were using Phoenix Iron Company made guns. That's a lot. So what's really cool is this is one of the original Griffin guns. There are hardly any that are known to exist, and that's one of them. There is one randomly on Gettysburg battlefield that when they were putting stuff together on the park, there's one there. And I believe the other one is in like somewhere in the South or Midwest. It's like random. But the actual, that cannon is rare. And it's not like the other ones. This is not the one that got mass produced. So yes, dedicated 1963, and there was a lot of that type of stuff going on for the centennial of the Battle of Gettysburg at the time, the Civil War centennial. Yes, the cannon does face the front door of St. Anne's. That is sometimes has come up multiple times throughout the years. It is facing Gettysburg. But they were smart back. I'll tell you what, they didn't plan these types of things. They were very detailed on where the gun was going to be placed and why it pointed this direction. There was a lot of significance to that kind of stuff. This is the cool photo from the late 50s of a whole bunch of neighborhood kids dressed up for Halloween. Anybody know who that is?
John Keenan?
John Keenan. And there are some other people, very Phoenixville people in this photograph. I know John can pick them all out, I think. They were all his friends. Just a cool photo. And John has a lot of great stories about growing up in Reeves Park, and Dave Meadows has stories about climbing underneath the bandshell. Like all kinds of just neat stories.
Are they on the bandshell?
Yes, they are. Yep. So you can see here's the original
Yes.
wood floor, wood plank floor. Some more dogwood photos, of course. As you all know, of course, the Dogwood Festival has been held every single year since it started in 1943 at Reeves Park. And that is, so significant for the Dogwood Festival and for Reeves Park. There's just been so many different celebrations throughout the years, and so many people have come through that park for the Dogwood. And this is one of the other cool negatives that we have from 1963. And you can see the benches real clear, and just look how many people are out there on these benches. I think I see a snow cone, maybe some French fries there, and it's just a great shot. And I'm sure there's some people here that probably could pick out some of these people that were This is the kind of stuff we need you guys to do. If you're from here, come down to the Historical Society and be like, hey, I know that person, and then we can identify some of these photographs. Just a really cool little kids ride that was happening in the park in a big milk crate. They ride down this roller here that came all the way down. Just a cool photo. I remember just as a kid, and this is in the 80s, of still having some of those kind of like makeshift little rides and stuff in the park for the kids. I remember the one. I never forget that one that you would go, and there was a guy that I think was a local farmer that you could actually go up and like act like you were milking a cow, and it had like these little like udders on it. And you felt like a little cow. Kind of cool. 1976, the bicentennial. So this, of course, is a photograph of them burying the time capsule, which is near the statue. There's not a lot of photos of this, believe it or not, that we have at the society, and so it's a cool shot that you don't see too much. And of course, there's the monument. We've got some time until that gets open. 2076. Okay, and on Veterans Day, on November 11th, 1979, is when the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was erected. Some of you might remember the original one. There was like a little makeshift one. I thought about this after I had put this in here, but there were temporary monuments like this. There was one for World War II that existed in the parking lot to the left of the Phoenixville post office that disappeared. There was one also on the north side of Phoenixville on the corner of High and Dayton Street that had every name on the monument of every man and woman from the north side that served in World War II. There are very few photos of that. I've seen 2. And I've even asked people who lived, like Grandmom, who was born in 1930, she didn't even remember it. She was like 14, 15 years old. She's like, I don't remember that. And I think it was there for a very short period, and it was gone. There is like kind of like a makeshift version of that Northside one that is actually in the Italian Club. If anybody's ever seen in the Italian Club, there's one that's hanging up. It has like a black board, and it has white lettering on it that has the names on it. Those pieces are from that monument. And some guys that I knew on the north side, told me that, well, yeah, they kind of snatched that stuff up before it was thrown out, but the rest of it's gone. But they got the names and kind of pieced what they could back together, and it's hanging up in the Italian Club.
Ryan, who built that memorial?
I believe the borough did. I think. I'm not 100% on that, but I'm pretty sure that they did. Like I said, there was a makeshift Vietnam one before. This is the one. Of course, now it encompasses multiple wars, but originally it was the Vietnam Memorial, which with this plaque. Having the soldiers' names from Phoenixville that didn't make it home, and so. I'm sure a lot of you in this room would have remembered some of these soldiers. Anybody know what that one is?
Is that on West Bridge, right?
Yep. That's out on Star. That was on Star Street, on the intersection of Star and Nut Road. That's the World War I monument.
Yeah.
So that moved not that long ago. Some of you remember, I think it was 2012. That was on that little island in the middle of Star and Nut Road. And they were afraid that with the increase in traffic that it was going to get damaged, and I'm sure some genius would have ran into it with a car at one point. And thank God it didn't happen. And they agreed to move the monument to Reeves Park. And it's in a much better location where you can actually walk up to it and read the names and not get hit by a car. But as you can see, when they put this here, it was very rural, and it was in a good location at the time, but obviously times changed tremendously. This back here, down here with the John Kennedy Ford and all that stuff, there is nothing here until you get down to corner stores. So the World War I monument dedicated in 1922. You know, of course, now located in Reeves Park. And
Ryan, I forget what's inside there.
so there's a lot of rumors to what could be located behind that plaque. And there was one thing that I had read one time that they had put, there's like it's carved out in the back, and supposedly they actually put little mini coffins for each soldier that died during the war, and they're all inside the back of that plaque. Obviously tried not to announce that to too many people because I would hate for someone to try and take that off. But you know, that supposedly is back there, and supposedly I think they said a flag. So this monument is interesting because when they dedicated in 1922, it actually has names missing off of that monument of World War I soldiers that died during the war. So it's not complete. I believe it has 26 names, and there was actually 31 that died, men and women. There's an army nurse that died in France. One of the later projects that I was personally involved in was the chess park, and this was done, as you can see from the plaque here, that's right next to the chess pieces and the tables and everything. Community Health Foundation. This was a project that we did. It was the 10th anniversary, and it was a part of the Leadership Academy, and I was a part of that in 2005. This was my class, 2005. And Jimmy Dioria had passed away while he was in our class. And so this was actually his idea. This was his idea, was to do this chess park. So we took his idea and made it for our anniversary of the Community Health Foundation. It was commemorated in May of 2008. And so we had done that, you know, that's hard to believe that's been there that long already. But anybody that doesn't know about the Leadership Academy, it is still a current thing, and they're always looking for people to take part in it. I highly recommend it. It's free, and it's like a 10-week course or 10-part course. They bring in people from the state to talk to you about nonprofit fundraising, and then they literally give you money to use it towards your project. That is what my project was, to acquire the Pennsylvania State Historical Marker for the Phoenix Iron Company.
I was in your class, right?
That's right, you were. Yep. Yep. So it's kind of a cool thing because you always run into people that were in your class.
I was thinking, was that right?
I know, it's crazy. I know. I was like, my goodness. I was 23 years old. But I still go back and talk to all the new classes and about my project and about this, and that's still a great thing. Anybody that hasn't done it, just look up on their website, and believe it or not, they have trouble filling that opportunity. Definitely look into it. Especially if you're a volunteer for some nonprofit, it's a great chance.
Ryan, whose shadow is that?
Yeah.
It's like the shadow of a hat. It's like some of the hat.
Yeah, I believe that
Photographer.
most likely that is John Keenan.
Oh,
Yeah, because he sent me this photo.
It's gonna live forever.
And of course, here's Mr. Reeves himself. Nice close-up photo. One thing that I would think, obviously, though you hear all this history about Reeves Park and all the people that have cared about it for as long as they have, I think we should probably try and raise money to clean the monuments. Look how it's bad. I don't know if it was ever been cleaned, because that's got some serious age to it, and it's just obviously it just needs to be cleaned. It's a beautiful monument. It just needs to be cleaned up, and of course, you know, you will have in 2028 will be the 150th anniversary of Reeves Park. So I think I've talked to some people, and it's in the distance, but I've talked to some people and say, hey, we really need to do something for that. So maybe it could be some sort of, I don't know if we want to wait that long to clean it, but it could be cool to rededicate the monument. Okay. Well, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I remember growing up at the Valley Forge Methodist Church, and Reverend Reeves was our pastor. Any relation?
Most likely. I don't know him personally, but the Reeves family was definitely in the area, and they still are. We've had Reeves descendants still donate stuff to us at the Historical Society. Like random stuff. They'll be like, oh yeah, we have this in the family, and it'd be like some personal item from Samuel Reeves or David Reeves. It's pretty cool. So most of them are related, probably is, being that it was right in Valley Forge. Most likely.
And Ryan, in addition to the Dogwood Festival, I recall, and I don't know if anybody else from here, the Army had like a little festival or fair. I remember that, where they had all the Army tents. And I was really little, and I remember in one of those tents, Bloody Charlie, where it, to this day, because I was little, and you went in and it showed how to like apply a tourniquet.
Oh, really?
And I was probably like, but it was the Army and then the hospital.
Valley Forge Army Hospital, yeah.
Yeah, but I remember a hospital festival too, Phoenixville Hospital Festival in the park.
Yeah, there were a lot of those types of
Yeah.
things in the park throughout the years. A lot of them have just gone away. But yeah, I've heard of the military thing.
Yeah.
And I think they even did that during like pre-World War I as well, because they were right down the street.
Yeah.
And they would just come out and like set up their stuff. And they actually used to have like little like, believe it or not, they actually did drills on the streets of Phoenixville. Like, and they did like urban combat training and stuff. Like, they would tell the citizens, oh yeah, we're gonna do this, and there'd be like guys running around, like, Jackson Street and like Main Street there, and all that area near the Battery or Company D Armory, the 111th guys. One thing you actually reminded me when you talked about another event was pretty interesting. Was I have this here. Yeah, I do have this here. The Historical Society, of course, we have our Strawberry Festival. We just had our Strawberry Festival. Well, I found out there was another Strawberry Festival that happened in Phoenixville in the May of 1879. They had a Strawberry Festival in Reeves Park to raise money for the gas lamps that produced their own gas. And then this was done by placing calcium carbide in the water. It produced a brilliant, bright white light, but was also very dangerous. But they actually had a Strawberry Festival in Reeves Park in the 1870s. Pretty interesting. Any other questions?
I noticed it was a sore subject back then. Whatever happened to the idea of extending the library over into the park?
I don't know much. I haven't heard much about that in a long time.
That
But-
kibosh was put on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think,
Sorry to bring that up.
one thing I did.
Anybody that lived on this street, Third Avenue, was not exactly thrilled about losing their right of way from one road to the
Yeah,
other.
there was some there's a lot of stuff that went into that. And of course, I read some of that one excerpt, from the deed or whatever, about them talking about not changing the park. So it was a thing. But I did fail to mention, of course, they eventually, of course, purchased the back part of where the baseball fields were later on. So that original Victorian park was in place. Went right behind the band shell was kind of the back of it for a very long time, and then they purchased the rest of that property, which is all rural. There's farms literally like right behind there that went down to the river.
What year was that other area purchased?
I'm trying to find the date, but I believe that it was in the 20s.
So that access road that goes to the park now, is that the original boundary of the borough?
It could be. Yeah. Yeah, so you,
Third Avenue, Fourth Avenue was the end of the borough, and there was a big pond where Fifth and Sixth Avenue was. That was all Schuylkill Township.
yeah, so like you said, at some point, the Schuylkill Township came down into the park. And then the borough got that in the 1870s. This is before the park was even had the grand opening. And you know, there was nothing behind there. There was farmhouses, and of course you had the knoll that sat up in the back, the big mansion, and then random farmhouses down the corner stores. But of course, all the other side of Star Street, they were all pretty much post World War II houses, and so that was all open area that went down to the river and to the railroad tracks.
And there were trolley tracks to Williams Corner, and trolley tracks out to the park, which is now on Valley Park Road. When you're going down Valley Park, on your right-hand side, you'll see what looks to be a building. That was the original ticket sailing for the amusement park. That was the terminus of the Valley Tredyffin Railroad. Valley
Park Interdifferent.
It was something like that. It had an odd name, but that was the
Right
terminus.
by the duck pond.
By the duck pond. And if you go across the ridge below Schuylkill School and look to your left, there's a huge water pipe runs along there. That was the original piers for the trolley going out there.
Frank knows a lot of stuff about Phoenixville. Yes.
I just wondered how old you said the park was gonna be in 2028?
150 years. Yep. So actually, last year was the 140th anniversary. Just last year.
Is there any estimate how much it would cost to clean the monument itself?
No idea. No one's ever looked into that.
You better get an archivist, because my wife would kill you if you took the patina off of that statue.
I've seen other things that, like with cleaning those types of monuments, and I mean, it could be it's,
Tens of thousands of dollars?
It's expensive.
We can do it for free.
Now they have there's a process for those monuments that once they clean them, there's an archival quality coating that they put on those monuments that will prevent it from doing that again.
Right.
Of course, the marble base as well needs to be cleaned.
Yeah, there you go.
Any other questions? Yes.
Coming forward in time, when I was a little girl, I remember Shantytown by Terrytown.
Yeah.
Who was that? What was that? What was?
Tunerville.
Yeah, Tunerville
Tunerville.
trolley, the Tunerville trolley that was back behind there, yeah.
The trolley went from where to where?
Well, it went into Phoenixville a little bit.
Fountain Inn went up to the park at Bonnie Bray.
Oh.
Of course, Bonnie Bray Park was
Bonnie Bray
huge.
Park. It was a big,
It was something.
big deal, yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? No?
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.